Alrighty, so here we've got Preston. He just won our 8-week Monster Games League. Preston, how does it feel, my man?
Oh, can't complain. Didn't really, uh, set my sights this high, but I had a blast playing, and yeah, it's always good to win.
Yeah, and you did a bit of winning and not very much losing. Remind me, so it was 8-week season, and were you at every one or did you miss two of them?
I did participate every week. Yeah,
Okay, so you went to 8, and there were 3 or 4 rounds each night. You went to 8 of these. How many matches did you lose over 8 weeks?
yeah. So there were 8 weeks of 4 matches. I lost, I think four matches. I think 4 matches, one draw, and 27 or something wins.
That's
It was
absolutely dominant. And not only did you have this win rate, it's not like you found one deck that was really well positioned and then became a master of that deck. I think you played 7 or 8 different decks too, right?
Yeah, I played a different deck every week. That's kind of what I came in with, since the format was proxies were not discouraged, we'll say. I was like, okay, and I think there's some room to brew and innovate, and so yeah, I decided, I think maybe week 1 or 2, I was like, I'm gonna try a different deck every week. If I lose and get, 6th place or 10th place or whatever in the league, that, I had fun just building, brewing, and playing different decks. So it was a lot of fun to have 8 different decks.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I've described this format as a brewer's paradise before. And as a brewer, what do you think? Does it hold up? And I guess really my question is, did you think it was gonna hold up? Because I thought someone was gonna bust it at some point. I thought someone would. I just did.
Yeah, I'm honestly surprised. I think it is a pretty good Brewers format. There's a lot of space, and just as a budget format in general, it kind of lends itself to kind of having constant flux. I mean, like Penny Dreadful on Magic Online, where every season there would be like, oh, let's try to do this thing that was really good in this season. It's like, oh well, oops, all spells. Oh, Narcomoeba is not legal, so it's like, how do you do that? So, there's just this fluctuation. It's like, oh, technically, if something gets really good, people buy into that, and then the cards go up, and then now it's no longer as good because you have to play on a budget. So I think budget formats in general are just great for brewers, just because it's constantly evolving, the meta is constantly shifting. Um, yeah, I've had a lot of fun brewing in this format for sure.
Yeah, and so if you had some like kind of overall statements or like guiding principles to your brewing or your deck selection, right? Because there's got to be some glue that holds this together and made this repeatable. Like how did you hit on 8 winners in a row? So what guiding thoughts do you have on this format or brewing in general or something?
Yeah. Basically, my thought was, okay, this is a vintage format. It's kind of like, if you're not interacting before turn 3, you kind of lose.
Yeah.
So, like, you've got to be playing Inquisition, you've got to be playing Counterspell, Daze, Spell Pierce. Blue and black are obviously the best colors for this, just because they have really cheap, good interaction. But I mean, white, you can play swords, you can play. I mean, I've seen people play Mana Tithe.
White gets
There's
remand
so
going forward, right?
Yeah, and white will get reprieve, I think is what it is, or
I
something like
yeah,
that.
some Lord of the Rings
Um,
thing, but that's crazy.
so yeah, it'll be interesting to see what that price will stabilize at. But yeah, I think generally, I was trying to, in my aggro decks, I was like, if I'm not winning by turn 4, it's not like, it's just not it's not a competitive brew.
Okay.
If I'm not interacting before turn 3, then it's not a good mid range deck. If I'm not winning before, if I don't have like a goldfish combo win before like turn 4, like you just get ran over, or you get picked apart by any of the interaction that I said earlier.
Yeah, that makes sense. From the start of the 8 weeks to the end of the 8 weeks, do you have any opinions change? Like, any of your card evaluations, did they shift? Is there anything like, oh, Hymn to Turok's better than I thought, Days is worse than I thought? Not saying these are right, just,
Mhm.
any thoughts like that?
I think I would do the opposite of that. Is that I think him is kind of medium, and Days is much better than in decks that can consistently pick up an island is much better than I thought it was. Um,
Okay.
for the first few weeks and the in the preseason, um, we just had like a normal league going on. There was a lot of mid range decks. There's a lot of decks that were just trying to play 4 and 5 drops and run value 3 drops, and I quickly learned that's like you can't do that in this format. Like, it's too fast. It's you've got to you truly interact or kill in the first like you got to be uh, pedal to the metal starting turn one, um, and it leads to an interesting dichotomy of how bad the mana is, because
Yeah.
even some of the pain lands are like $1, and it's tough to justify spending $1 on a pain land. Um, so I think like 1 or 2 color, or if you have another way to mana fix like Astrolabe, or
Yep.
um, if you're doing some kind of gates thing, then I think you probably could go more than 2 color. But I just trying to streamline just the cheapest, quickest, easiest way to get to um, you know get your opponents dead.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I gotta say, I find it kind of refreshing that it's a format where you're actually incentivized to not be greedy and play like 1 or 2 colors. Because I mean, I've been watching a little bit of modern content lately, and like I'll see Aspiring Spike, and he'll be like, "Oh, I just added a fourth color to this deck because it's modern, it's free." Like,
Yeah, fetch lands really make it so that you can just it's so easy to just I'm like blue black base, but I've got a Godless Shrine
yep,
and Unburial Rites, and it's like free,
yeah,
or
sure,
I play Ephemerate or whatever, and it's just like it's free to splash, a little bit of damage, self damage, but it is really nice in this format to play like a 1 or 2 color. It almost feels the mana bases feel a little bit better than draft, but
yep.
like a pretty good cube is what I would say is a good analogy.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And did you find yourself selecting decks based on like the 2 color pairs with good mana often? Because I was just talking to the guy who won our Win a Taiga yesterday, and we
Mm-hmm.
were talking about how, like for example, black red, you get like 12 dual lands for like $1.20 or something. Blue red, you get like Shivan Reef for $1.40, and then if you want Sulfur Falls, it's like $7 for a placeholder.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Blue,
is black red fundamentally better than blue red because the lands are better? Maybe,
I
maybe.
don't think that's necessarily the case, but yeah, it definitely does play a big role. Like the what is it? The ally color pairs I feel like are much stronger than the enemy color pairs, because you get the reveal lands and the tango lands from Battle for Zendikar, the ones that if you have 2 basics come
Yeah,
into play untapped. Um, and those are really cheap. And then there's also the uh, tapped cycling lands
yep,
that are decently playable as well. So, and the enemy color pair doesn't really have something like that.
yeah.
Um, so it's really interesting to see how the color balance kind of plays out based on the mana base.
Yeah, it is. And you actually just did a little bit of analysis on the color balance over the
Mm-hmm.
league recently, right?
I did, yeah. I was just curious. I think week 4, week 5, I was like, looking at some top eights, and I was like, gosh, green does not seem very good. And then I was like looking, and I was like trying to like think about it. And I was like, well, you really can't play like you probably play like a green aggro deck and probably pretty good. I
Sure.
think Tron is decent in this, and just because like if you can get to Tron on turn 3, you start to interact or threaten your opponent's life total. But if you're not doing that or not interacting, which is really hard for green to do, um, it's tough. It's tough. So green, I feel like, is kind of a supporting color in this format so far. It's really good to there's some obviously good cards in green, both for aggro or combo. Um, so I think green's still a decent color, but you know, it doesn't have the same level of interaction that the other colors do.
I agree, and I think it's missing busted cards. Because one of the theories that I've heard this from, I think Doug, you, I believe Holden, a couple other people. A lot of people have a Jim, I think, said it as well. A lot of people say I wanted to play the busted cards, and I wanted to see how many I could fit in my deck. I know Doug really likes to push this to the limits. He wants to play Dig Through Time, Treasure Cruise, Tinker, Balance, Sol Ring, and not only does he want to play them in his deck, he wants to Gifts Ungiven to find them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like he wants to maximize the cards that he shouldn't be allowed to play. Um, and green, what does green have? Green has Once Upon a Time. Card's pretty
Channel.
good. We get one channel. Good luck.
You get channel. You get Once Upon a Time.
Uh, and once you go past that, it's like, what busted stuff is green really bringing to the table? I think you hit the nail on the head when you described Tron, and I'm going to say by extension to Tron, 12 post, or any kind of Cloud Post deck. You described them as decently decent. I really like that, because I agree. They are decently decent.
Yeah, I think yeah, and another struggle that green has is that a lot of the top end, just in this format in general, um, it gets is weirdly expensive because of this weird 100 card format that people play. I don't know.
Never heard of it. Never
And
heard of 100 card
everybody
format.
likes to play like big splashy 8 and 9 mana spells. And green is really good at putting those cards ahead of curve. And turns out whenever you're playing like the 12th or 13th best eight drop, it's not near as good as playing like Hymn to Torok or Days. So yeah, green's just in a little awkward spot, I think, in this format. That there's not really like a lot of really busted, unfair stuff. And then also like the thing it does really well is like pumping out big guys. It's like hard to get a good like top end because it's just they're all expensive for weirdly. Or if they're not expensive, then they're like $2.50, and it's like,
That's expensive. Yeah, it
oh,
adds up. I
it's
remember I
it's just
tried
so tough.
I tried to put like 2 copies of World Breaker into like Cloud Post or something, and it was like $1.80, and I was like, it just doesn't work. And it's like in Tron or Post, you don't have like Ulamog, Ugin,
Yeah.
Karn. You're tapping out for like Steel Hellkite.
Yeah, and there's like those sort of decks don't have good catch up mechanics. Like a
Yeah,
lot of the big mana decks in other formats, they rely on stuff like Karn and Ugin and Ulamog to to break parity. Oh, I'm casting this huge thing. It's gonna 3 for 1 you, and okay, now I'm like stabilized, and now because I have way more mana than you, I'm gonna win the long game.
right.
And there's not good stabilization mechanics unless you like splash white or for board wipes or another color for interaction.
Yep. I think you're right that green's a good supporting color. Like I don't think it's stone unplayable. We see it in like Teamer Rhinos, Glimpse of Tomorrow, which Spencer just played to a pretty good finish yesterday. Um, Devoted Druid I think is good and underplayed.
I agree.
Enchantress is green based. Troll Worship, which is a sidebar of Enchantress. Infect has green cards in it. But okay, so that's enough about green. Do you want to move on to some of the decks that you've played?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to.
All right, so I don't know if you I'm not sharing my screen on Discord, which I guess I could have, but I'm not going to. I've got some lists pulled up. I've
Sure.
got your blue red wheel tribal from the preseason, and then next to it
Okay.
I've also got the one that you played in week 2.
Okay. Got it.
I think the differences between them aren't huge, so whatever we talk about is probably similar. So I thought this deck was sweet and terrifying. So it looks like you're built around Hull Breacher and Narset, but again, you only get one Narset,
Yeah.
and you're really looking to leverage wheels, right? Like force draw effects, like Vision Skeins or Collective Defiance. How'd this deck feel? What was the thought process here? And
So
actually,
yeah, I
so
started on the
yeah,
wheel tribal, just because I was like, oh, what busted things can you do in this format? What's cheap and and feels really bad to play against? And it's like, oh well, Hull Breacher because it's not really good in Legacy. Like Narcissus mainly better in Legacy, and you can't play it in Commander anymore. So
yeah,
it's
it's
like
illegal everywhere.
80 cents. So or maybe $1 or something. But and then it was like then it was the challenge of getting the wheels, because a lot of the wheels are expensive, but also because of Commander. I know that I play a little bit of Pioneer, and I know last year there was a blue red control deck that ran around with Narset and Collective Defiance. So that's kind of where I started. Is I was like, okay, Collective Defiance is a good modal spell. It can kill a creature. It can go face. It can kind of do like kind of role play, and then just occasionally you'll like turn 3 flash in a whole breacher, turn 4 untap, mind twist you, just remove all your cards. And
Yeah.
that's just I felt like it was a really good win con for control. Um, Controls I feel like is really hard to build in this format because there's so much you can be doing. Like you've gotta have answers to aggro and to combo and a lot of different combo. Like you have graveyard combo or dredge or like high tide or stuff like hypergenesis or the glimpse of tomorrow. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of different things that you need to tech around. So I was like, I'm going to have a decent control deck. I'll have some counter spells and some lightning bolts. And, if I'm ever playing against a combo deck or whatever, and they're like, okay, I'm going to sit back and make you counter a card every turn. And then I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to strip your hand and then we'll go to game 2.
Right, so it's almost
So,
like you're a control deck, but you're not giving your opponent all the time in the world. You're gonna slam the door shut at some point. And actually, I really felt that because I was playing against Doug yesterday. I was on High
mm-hmm,
Tide. He was on Gift's Thopter Sword,
mm-hmm.
except he had duresses and extirpates. So like I was sitting there and I was like, at some point he's gonna duress me, take a High Tide, and then strip it. I gotta go. And if you're wondering, he beat the shit out of me.
Yeah, that's another way to just like because a lot of the spell based combos are they'll just make you like make decks that are playing counter spells like okay, if you don't have it every single turn, then eventually you're going to run out of counter spells, and then I will go off.
Yep.
And High Tide I think is a very good example of that. And that was kind of my thinking with this is that um, uh, you just strip their hand, and then it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I mean, it works against aggro, it works against control, and especially whenever you have like a wheel. Like I played a commit to memory,
Yep.
where you draw 7 and make 7 treasures, and then you say you have 1 draw a turn. Like I have all this mana advantage and all this card advantage. I think I got you from here. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, the differences between them are pretty minor. I thought, honestly, I've come up a lot on the Wandering Fumarole, just manlands in general.
Mm-hmm.
In this deck, especially since I was not running a whole lot of win cons. Um, if it just came down to just, they would keep killing my um, Hull Breacher before I could wheel them. It's like, okay, well, then I'll just beat you down with 4 1s and
Yeah.
we'll go to game 2 or whatever. So, yeah, I overall, I thought this was a pretty a good success. I probably would change some things now after another 6 weeks or so of after looking at this. Yeah, I think this is a pretty good example of a decent control deck. I'm pretty happy with this.
Yeah, and so I think kind of to structure us a little bit because we have 6 or 8 decks to go through. I think the
Mm-hmm.
questions I really want to ask for each deck are kind of, well, I guess kind of general overview. Lessons learned I think is a good one. Like
Mm-hmm.
manlands are pretty good. Your thoughts on control and closing the game. I think whether you think a deck is kind of worth revisiting is a good one, right? Is it a flash in the pan, like a one-off that you caught people off guard
Mm-hmm.
and that's it? We're going to shelve the deck, or is it something that you think is someone should pick up in the format potentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that's the
Okay,
only one we
sure.
haven't really answered. Do you think this deck has staying power, or do you think it's a flash in the pan?
I think overall, I mean, some changes, but I think the overall idea of it is really good. Just to be able to have a control deck that has another win con. So I think if you have a you know affinity for control, this is a pretty good starting point to have some kind of maybe not whole breacher combo, but just some way to go way over the top of basically every other deck. Um,
Yeah, I
so
agree.
yeah, I would say that I like the core of this so much that actually, if I would have been able to go to the Win Tiger, this is probably what I would have played.
Whew, that's scary. I'm glad I didn't have to play against it. Last question on this one. Niv Mizzet Perun. Yes or no?
I really want to say yes, but I don't. If I played the Winnipeg this week, I wouldn't have registered a visit Perun.
I
He's really
respect the
cool.
honesty because I also really want to see Niv Mizzet show up. I probably wouldn't register it either.
Yeah, he's $2 now, and six mana is just really tough. In the week that I played this was really good because people would try to counterspell it or not counterspell, kill it. Like, okay, I'll draw and ping you, and then I'll counter your kill spell, and then I'll draw and ping you. Um, and another, yeah. So I thought Niv was a good fit for this deck, but overall, I don't think it's a very good fit for this format.
Makes sense. I briefly played around with a blue-red control list that was a
Hmm.
Lutri companion list,
Okay.
and I was looking to polymorph into either a Hullbreaker Horror or a
Hmm.
Stormtide Leviathan.
Okay.
Maybe Niv Mizzet could have a home in something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a very interesting idea. And yeah, I'd have to play around with that, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Lutri companions are really good cards, but Lutri's it's a tough one for sure.
Yeah, Lutri pushes the barrier on. It's definitely the lower tier. All right, so that's Wheel Tribal. Then you played the Soul Herder list, right?
Yes, I played the blue white blink. I think is what I called it. This was back when ephemerate was like 80 cents, 60 cents, something like that.
It's
I think it's that.
11.50 for a playset.
Yeah, it's spiked. I think it's a little bit cheaper than that. I think it's just that printing that is so much more expensive. But
Wow, so
yeah,
is that
they're
just out of our
they're
format? That's crazy.
it's kind of just fallen completely out of the format. Um, it's gone up a lot. So the main draw of this deck was the Vincer lock.
Yeah,
Of course, it's a blue white mid range deck playing counterspell and swords of plowshares for interaction. So it's got pretty decent early game and okay against combos. And then you play Vincer Shaper Savant with either a Soul Herder on the battlefield or an Ephemerate in hand, and then you make it so they can't play lands anymore
yeah,
since Vincer does not say non-land for some reason. And if they play something really scary, all of your bounce spells become, or all of your blink spells become bounce for spells as well. So that's the general vibe of this deck. I play both the Monarch and the Initiative in this deck.
yep,
Just because they're really good targets for blink. Because if they take it back, you don't even have to hit them. You just blink your Palace Jailer and get the Monarchy back. Um, so overall, I think this was a good deck for the format at the time. I think now it'd be pretty tough just because you're kind of focused on resolving this four mana spell. Um, and I think the idea, like, ephemerate is a very strong card, and if it comes down a little bit more, I think there is definitely a pretty good ephemerate deck. I mean, there's ephemerate has like it props up a whole archetype in Pauper. There's
yeah.
probably 10 decks that play ephemerate in Pauper, just to show you how strong of a card it is. So I think there is something here, but overall, I wouldn't register anything close to this nowadays.
I think I really agree with that. It's a little too mid-rangey, like we talked about, right? Um, One thing I really like that you hit on is that so this is a mid-rangey pile,
Hmm.
but you mentioned that you also have an end game. You have the
Hmm.
Venser lock, right? If you can just get enough ephemerate triggers, enough soul herder triggers, your opponent stops playing the game. So, really similarly to the blue-red control deck, you have a way to slam the door. You're not giving your opponent all the time in the world to draw to their outs or like find turnabout and then like high tide you.
Hmm.
You are presenting a win con, even though it's like kind of a grindy one, which I like. I like that even in this early version of the deck, you're kind of showing that principle there.
Yeah, and I think it's just. I mean, I think that's just kind of a tenet of Magic is you want
Yeah,
to give your opponents as at least in 1v1 competitive Magic, you want to give your opponents as little chance to win the game as possible. So, um, I'm still playing of basically a value pile in this 75, but there is a way to basically stop your opponents from playing Magic. So,
yeah,
and that's I think this is the format to be doing unfair things. So If your deck is not doesn't have an unfair thing, you may want to look into having some kind of uh, top end that can go way over the top of anybody else.
Yeah, that makes sense. Lessons learned on this one, kind of grindy. Palace Jailer and Aarakocra Sneak, Initiative and Monarch, both good, right?
Yeah, both very good. Initiative better than Monarch, but I
Interesting.
think Palace Jailer is a better card than Aarakocra Sneak.
I agree. I agree with all of that. Yeah, Initiative's a more powerful mechanic,
Mm-hmm.
but Jailer is a pretty pushed card, especially with Ephemerate. Because
Yes,
you can stack multiple creatures under the Jailer, because it's not like a Fiend Hunter, right?
it's yeah, it's they can kill the Palace Jailer, and that's not a big deal. And it always feels really good to be able to if they're like, oh, I'm going to get the monarchy back, I'm going to get my creatures back. You're like, okay, I'll block one of them, and then I'll ephemerate my Palace Jailer and I'll take the other attacker, and then they don't. Then you have another thing under the monarch, and they don't even get the monarch. So
Yep.
it did feel really good. But it stood basically. It needed some way to power out. Um, the mid-rangey stuff. So I leaned pretty heavily into the ramp here.
Yeah, I like the Signets. I haven't seen many people play Signets, and I think it's cool that you are. I think
Mm-hmm.
Doug has probably played them in a gifts version at some point. But no, I like that. So
Mm-hmm.
overall, probably keep this one on the shelf for a while.
Yeah, I agree.
Yep. All right, next, this was your green black mid range, right? Or green
Yeah,
black rock.
the Rock. This was I think right when Phyrexia All Will Be One came out, and I was really interested in playing Glissa Sunslayer.
Yeah, I
Um,
need to read this card.
Yeah, I mean the most common one is the first mode.
Yeah,
It's basically a Phyrexian arena that hits them for 3 every turn. So, or it can just be a blocker that they can't get through. Um, and overall, I think this list is fine. It does a lot of different things, but overall is just too fair of a deck. This was just kind of my attempt of, oh, I want to play fun cards and see how well I do and what it feels like, and try to have an answer kind of for everything. And as you'll probably see looking through this list, there's not really any way to slam the door shut like I do in the other ones. So overall, it didn't feel like this was great, but I really want to play with the Glissa. I want to play with Lily, the Last Hope, since it's crazy that she's a playable card in this format, considering
yeah,
where we were
$5 is doable. It's a good planeswalker.
for sure. And then Grimflayer also uh, was very fun to play.
Yeah, I agree. I really like the look of this, but same thing. It's very mid rangey.
And I
I
think at the start of the format, there were a lot of people doing this. Well, I say the start of the league.
Yep.
Excuse me. The start of the league, there was a lot of people just playing 3 and 4 drops. Like I'm playing Desecration Demon, which I don't think is a very good card. But I was like, oh, I wasn't around for that standard. I heard this is a good card. Let's try it out and see, how this format compares to something like a past standard. Um, and yeah, overall, this did a lot of cool things, but I don't think it wasn't playing unfairly, and that's kind of part of the way to win games in this format. I think.
Yeah, you do have Hymn to Turok, which I describe as uh, the most unfair fair card I've ever seen. Right? Because
That's a good way to put it. Honestly, in retrospect, I think I would have preferred playing Inquisition over Hymns, although I think it is a little bit higher on the budget curve.
huh,
Just being able to interact and take the problem cards, um, I
that
thought was better than just too random. As much as I think Hymnotoric is better in aggressive decks, because you could strip 2 lands or whatever, and then they're stumbling. But there's too many decks in my opinion that Hymnotoric, yeah, it's a 2 for 1, but like in this format, 2 for 1s don't really matter whenever you're trying to win on turn 3 or turn 4. So um,
so
I
you're
think
you're kind of down
it's
on him a little bit, right?
I am a kind of down on him a little bit, unless you're specifically playing an aggressive deck with him
Okay.
that you're trying to strip answers from your opponent.
No, that makes sense. I think that matches some of my experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, they're like as High Tide. I have a hard time with him for sure. Um, But yeah, I think there are some decks that don't care a ton about it, and it does miss the specific thing. So maybe that's a good point. Maybe I don't know. Maybe him's a little overvalued right now, even. Um,
And I don't think him's a bad card.
yeah,
I would still play it now, but I think it's a lot of people are using it a little bit as a crutch and trying to play. Oh, I'm going to play mono black mid range, and it's fine because I've got him to Torok to help with the control decks, and I think it's yeah, against Spellgate's combo it's good, and against and in aggro decks, whenever you're the beatdown, I think it's pretty good to be able to do that. But there's just not a lot of mid range versus mid range, and the random 2-for-1 doesn't really matter in a lot of other matchups, in my experience.
I agree with that. I think part of the reason I describe him as an unfair card is that sometimes it does just create a non-game, though, right?
For sure, for
And a
sure.
non-game is a winning game for the him player. Sometimes you do just get their 2 lands and they kept a 3-lander and they don't draw land.
Mm-hmm.
So it does have that unfair side to it. But yeah, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I agree with your take on this. It looks like a nice deck, but at the end of the day, maybe not quite what we're about here.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think this is where you turned up the combo aspect from here, right?
Yeah, from here on out, I was saying at that point I was like, okay, mid range didn't cut it in this format. Even if you have some kind of backup, I'm gonna try to win on turn 3. I'm gonna try to win on turn 4. I'm gonna try to win earlier than that if possible. So I was all about aggro and combo, and that's where I'm most comfortable as well. I really like playing combo, and I really like playing aggro. I'm a big proponent of make them have it. Yeah, from here on out, I think I played aggressive or combo decks.
Yeah, because remind me, and I should have asked this earlier. What's your background in Magic outside of Vintage? You're largely Pioneer these days, right?
Yeah. I let's see. I got started in Magic 5 years ago or so.
That's not that long
And
in the grand scheme of
I
Magic.
know, right? I only started about 5 years ago. Actually, started whenever Magic Arena came around. That's what got me into
Mm.
Magic. And then for a long time, I played limited. I was a big limited player.
Oh yeah.
Uh, Played lots of drafts and pre-releases and such for every stuff. And then whenever Pioneer, I guess not when that came out. It was like more like right after all the combo winter stuff or combo whenever that was. And I remember being like, "Oh, that sounds like an interesting format." Like modern, I didn't have any background in cards to be able to buy into modern. Fetch lands don't sit well with me now, and the price tag didn't sit well with me then. So I got into Pioneer, playing White Weenie, right when what was that, Crimson Vow with Thalia. So I was
Oh
playing
yeah, yeah.
Thalia in Pioneer for a while, and then I've ran through a couple different decks in Pioneer, but I do like playing wide aggressive decks, and uh, there for a while I also turned to play Lotus Field combo, um, because what is combo but an aggro deck that just kills on a different axis than life total most of the time, or at least
Honestly,
with
that's true,
hitting
right?
with
Because
creatures.
it kind of goes back to your idea of make them have it, right?
Exactly. It's oh, you didn't have a counter spell or you couldn't interact with me before turn 5, turn 6, depending on the format. You lose. Sorry. And I mean that's how aggro is. If you don't have removal spells or board wipes, you die to creatures, and spell based combos like Lotus Field is the same way. It's like, okay, you didn't interact with me. I'm gonna tap and untap my lands and then cast Approach twice, and we'll go to the next one.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm looking at your high tide list right now.
Mm-hmm.
This was not too long after Dominaria remastered, right? So all the high tide cards plummeted in price. And if I remember right, the week that you played this, you were one of 3 high tide players.
I think that's right. I think there wasn't anybody playing it, and I was like, High Tide is probably the best Storm deck. It's so cheap now. There's you get to play Cruise and Dig and all, like, I think I played 4 or 5 restricted cards in this list, and I was like, if I'm doing that, I can't be wrong. Like, this feels too consistent to be bad.
Yeah, because you picked up a 4-0 with this one, right?
That's correct. Yeah, this was a 4-0. I think I had some pretty decent matchups, but basically, I other than I think I had 3 days in the main deck, I was just solely focused on comboing. I was with my experience in the format. I was like, I think turn three, turn four, like I'm just going to win every game if I go off on either of those turns, which is pretty easy for this deck to do with the amount of
Yeah.
cantrips and even I think I played a solve the equation as well to ensure that I hit all the cards that I needed.
Yeah, and I think you're right, because if your opponents are playing mid-range decks like that Grim Flayer deck we looked at, or like
Yeah,
the Blink deck even, right? What's the Blink deck going to do? They've got 4 counter spells, and they've got Venser. Those are the only cards you would care about in that matchup.
yeah.
And I mean, sure, counterspell's fine, Venser's fine, but it's not a lot of cards.
Yeah, if you don't find one of those seven, you just lose.
Yep.
So there was a lot of decks that were playing that sort of game plan at that point. So I was like, I'm going to punish all those people. You need to play some kind of way to deal with Storm because you will die in 3 turns.
And I think this week really was a turning point for Storm being put on the map, and really pushing to new and higher levels of unfair decks. And I will say, I love a nice unfair deck. I love High Tide. It's what I played yesterday. One of my biggest worries with this format is that there would be too many unfair decks that are A, too good, and B, on such different axes that slightly less unfair decks can't police all of them, right? Because we don't have a catch-all like Force of Will. So my worry has been that, like, if there's Hypergenesis, Affinity, Infect, High Tide, Cephalid Breakfast, like, how do you cover all that? And I was worried that mid-range or control decks would wither and die, or aggro even. But we had the win a Taiga yesterday, so there was more than $200 for first, as well as pretty good prize payout for, third, fourth, fifth, etc. We had 2 control decks in the top 8.
Wow.
We had an aggressive. So you don't know that. Have you looked at the top 8 from that?
I have not. No, I hadn't had a chance to look through the.
So I'll just run through
standings.
it. And, it seems like a good time to talk about how the format
Sure.
shifted. Mono Red Obosh won, beating out Enchantress in the finals, and then before that, Doug on Thopter Sword, and a mono black mid range player, and then there was me on High Tide. There was blue white control, Infect, and I think I'm blanking on one.
Looks like the Asmo deck.
Oh yeah. My friend Eddie was playing the Asmo food list, which has an unfair slant. But I gotta say, I was really happy to see 2 control decks, a mid range deck, an aggro deck, a combo deck, a prison deck. Enchantress's prison combo, right?
Yeah.
That feels like really nice deck diversity.
For sure, yeah, and that just looking at that top 8, that looks like a pretty good look at where the format is. I think if you're not playing unfair, then you've got to have a lot of interaction, and you've got to pack your sideboard full of cards that can beat lots of different decks, and part of any tournament like that is you've got to get a little lucky, and
Yeah.
you know what they say, better lucky than good.
That is the truth of it, isn't it? Um, but yeah, I think, when you played High Tide, we did start slanting into that unfair side. But
Agreed.
luckily, I don't think we're in an absolutely disgusting combo fest of decks that just don't interact, and it's like 2 ships in the night. I don't think we're there yet, which is good. Any thoughts or lessons learned on this High Tide list? I know the one thing I was uncertain about was Days, but you said Days felt pretty good, right?
Yeah. So my thinking for getting Days in the main was like, oh, I think I'm going to beat all the mid range decks and like even some of the aggro decks without
Yeah.
a horrific draw. So I was like, I need some way to interact with other unfair decks, and I was kind of at this point I was thinking what you were thinking as well, where oh, this is it's going to be everybody's going to be playing unfair decks because these sort of decks will push out all the mid range. So I'm actually happy that there's a deck diversity um,
Yeah.
that's still going on because at this point I was like I'm going to put 3 days in, and yeah, if it sets me back a turn it's fine, but if it keeps me from losing the game then I'm for it. Like I'll
Yep.
take another a turn 5 or turn 4, but if I'm preventing my opponent from winning the game then I'm gonna that feels pretty good, worth a card for me.
Yeah, I agree. Any thoughts on repeal? I've been playing Echoing Truth in that slot, just in case my opponent has like two damping spheres in play.
Mm-hmm.
But I also will say I've never had two damping spheres across the table from me at the same time. So maybe repeal
Yes,
would just be better.
my honestly, my thinking with repeal is that's what people in Penny Dreadful were playing, and it
Yeah.
makes sense that because it hits everything and draws a card. It's good. It's decent against aggro just to bounce a 1 drop,
Oh yeah.
or hit uh, anything that needs to be hit. And worst case scenario, you just like bounce something random and draw a card if you're wanting to storm off on the same turn.
Yeah.
So
You can also pick up your own Cloud of Fairies, right? Or
yeah,
you were
I
on
didn't
no.
play any
You
Cloud
had
of
no Cloud of
Fairies,
Fairies.
but
Yeah.
but
Okay.
yeah, I think that's a good way to do it, and it was just it was a way to interact that also drew me cards that get me closer to comboing. Just
Yeah,
the thinking
that makes
there.
sense. Maybe I'll start playing with repeal instead of echoing truth, and
Hmm.
I might need to try some mystical disputes. I
Hmm.
have been having a hard time with control lately. I think I
Interesting.
need some practice, but I may need to try some mystical disputes. Cool.
Yeah, you'll have to let me know how it turns out.
Yeah, I've also been thinking I might shelve High Tide for a little while. There's some stuff I want to explore, like I think Affinity could be explored a little more. I think Luris could be explored a little bit more, so I'm kind of interested in those. So I might switch gears. But speaking of switching gears, now you switched over to Tempered Steel after that. A pretty different deck, right?
For sure. So yeah, this was another deck that idea that I think I got from Penny Dreadful. Tempered Steel is basically two Glorious Anthems stapled together for the same mana cost,
Yeah.
um, and there's lots of good cheap artifact creatures that um, help with Tempered Steel, be able to kill your opponent. So I originally started with just overstated creatures like the Court Homunculus, the Ice-Hide Golem,
Yep.
Ornithopter. And then, doing some playtesting stuff, I was like, okay, I can't quite just rely on Timbered Steel. Like, I need a little bit more pushing power. So I ended up putting in 4 Michiko's Grain of Truth and 4 Steel Overseer, just as kind of, they're not quite as strong as Timbered Steel, but they do a pretty good impression of it. Um, and um, I found that I really wanted to just pump my hand onto the board as fast as possible. So I really tried to squeeze in the 4 Memnite that you see, which is like the vast majority of the budget of this deck.
Insane.
Um,
Yeah.
just as another 0-drop artifact creature that had power and toughness that would really be a threat with Tempered Steel.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like the idea of redundancy because I know Chris played this a little bit, and it
Mhm.
was always difficult to find Tempered Steel. And if you didn't find Tempered Steel, it's like if you don't have the card your deck is named after, what's the point, right?
Yeah, for
But
sure.
Steel Overseer does a fine impression. I think Machiko's Reign of Truth is very, very scary.
Yes, it is very scary, and I also played 4 Mishra's Factories just because they're strangely an artifact creature whenever you animate them.
Yeah.
And a very fun thing that I would do is on the second Michiko's Reign of Truth trigger, in response, I could just tap my Mishra's Foundries to, if I didn't have anything else to spend my mana on, and just make that second pump for Michiko's Reign of Truth be that much bigger.
Like you would just animate
So
the land as an
just
additional
animate
artifact.
for an extra artifact just to get another extra point of damage if I thought the point of damage mattered.
Yeah.
Um, but overall, I think the main reason I really wanted to play this is because of Swooping Lookout, which is a super sweet card that's 6 cents and really good in this specific deck.
Yeah.
It's basically like Sarah Angel. And so I split it with the Vault Scourge as flying threats that'd be good against aggro. Um, and so yeah, those were both pretty good blockers for aggro or just help with the race.
That makes sense. One thing I'm noticing about your main deck, and this kind of circles back to what we're talking about, this is a combo deck because you have no interaction at all.
Yeah, I'm playing. I'm just again playing. Do you have it?
Yeah,
Do you have the sweeper? Do you have enough interaction to beat me? I was I originally put in try to fit in swords, but turns out swords are kind of expensive and Memnites were better, so
yeah,
I ended up playing Memnites instead. So and I think this was it made sense to me, and I'm playing a combo aggro deck, and I, it was enough to be bigger than every other aggro deck and still have a decently fast clock.
yeah. Because it really looks like you're gonna dump most of your hand on turn two, and then if you have the tempered steel on turn three, you're attacking for a lot. So I feel like you can race a lot of combo decks. Like if you're on the play, you're killing on turn three. High Tide's not going off on their turn two.
Hmm.
High Tide can go off on their turn three, but just win the games where you're on the play.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Die
it
roll matters a lot in this format.
it looks like the
Um,
sideboard you have a little bit of interaction, but not even a ton.
Yeah, I played two portable holes just as ways to help pump the Michiko's Rain of Truth, that kind of a catch-all for everything. And then yeah, other than that, I was just trying to be streamlined, and I had tried to have a little bit for everything. And looking back, I probably could make a little bit of refinement here, but um, yeah, I basically was just streamlined, trying to kill turn three, turn four,
Yeah. Um,
because like I said, I don't have interaction, so I'm going to win the game on turn three, turn four. So
I agree.
yeah.
Just like you said, ask the question. Going forward, do you think this deck is worth someone considering? Would you ever play it again, or was it just like get it out of your system, play it once, and see how it feels?
No, I think this deck was pretty good. I'm not certain Memnite is worth it. Like I honestly didn't know like the zero mana O3 existed. So that may be better to free up budget for something else. But um, it, honestly, this deck I feel like has legs. I instead of the Memnite at my first draft had one Arcbound Ravager instead, which also is a very unfair card, especially when you're playing all artifacts. But yeah, so I think this idea has some pretty good legs. I prefer playing it as like an aggro with an aggro slant rather than playing something like Lion Sash or
Yeah.
some of the bigger artifact creatures. I think it's really important in this format to hit the ground running and try to win the game.
Yeah. So do you think that most all-in aggro decks that can threaten a kill on turn three or turn four probably fine, right?
Yeah, I think aggro that can threaten on turn three or turn four are in a good spot in this format for sure.
Yeah, I like that. Sweet. Next deck I have up. This is a fun one. This oops all spells, right?
Yeah, so yeah, week five I played Oops All Spells. Um, this is probably the deck that I put the most time in. I went over this. I think I probably made Simon tear his hair out from how many times I resubmitted this list. Um, there was I read a lot of sideboard guides for the legacy version of this, and looked at a lot of Penny Dreadful decks with this idea. But basically, the idea is Balustrade Spy or Undercity Informer to mill your entire library because you're playing the modal dual face cards from Zendikar Rising that are lands on the back, and then that'll bring hopefully four Dark Amoebas back, or at least three, so that you can Dread Return your Angel of Glory's Rise and win the game with a Lab Man and a Zombie, which also offers a little bit of help against interaction because you tap one to draw a card from an empty library. And if they have removal for the lab man, then you can tap the other one as well. So they actually need two pieces of removal
Yeah.
to be able to stop you. And it also had a pretty decent backup plan with So I was playing Bridge from Below just as a way to win if they had an extra pate or something for Labman, um, because I'm also playing this one of Memory's Journey that can put 3 cards back on top of my library and then just beat down with zombies. Um, so it had a pretty good, decent backup plan, and um, it was really streamlined. Honestly, the only reason I'm playing the green lands in this is for sideboard cards in the Memories Journey.
Yeah.
So um, yeah, it was. I was all in on the combo. I was gonna win on as early as turn 2 with a Spirit Guide and a Dark Grit, but usually turn 3, turn 4 was the way that this deck would consistently go off with 1 or 2 Spirit Guides or just a Dark Grit.
Yeah, I mean the deck looks it's really well defined. It looks like a lot of thought went into it. Selecting the lands seems like a nightmare, especially when you have to keep cost in mind. I think it's so funny seeing like Hagra Mauling be there. Just I assume because you just needed another black land.
Yes, yeah, just trying to meet as many black sources as possible for the possibility of dark grid on turn 2 to win the game.
Yep.
Yeah, so Hagra Mauling was a little bit painful, but it was a black source and it was the next best one because the other uncommon one is weirdly like $5. So
Oh yeah, the scam one. It's
the
I have
scam
one
one. Yep.
Malakir Rebirth. Yeah, I agree. Phantasmagorian, it's my understanding that's in the list so that if you mill yourself on the off chance that one of your combo pieces is stranded in your hand, you can discard, say, your Azami to get it into the graveyard before you dread return. Is that correct?
Yeah, basically as backup for Cabal Therapy, which is the main way to strip your own hand, because Cabal Therapy you can target yourself weirdly, so you can strip your own Labman or Dread Return or whatever. But in the weird case where you'd have 3 different ones, or you really needed to check for interaction, Phantasmagorian would be pretty decent at that. The other kind of niche case is that you can Dread Return Phantasmagorian if they take your Lab Man just as a 6/6 to beat them down with.
Yeah, I mean that plus some bridge from below zombies, right? You get 3 zombies from sacking the Narcs, and you get a Phantasmagorian. So you put
so
12
yeah,
power
you,
into
you're
play.
putting 12 power into play and still have 3 turns to kill them with it. So I
Yeah,
figured it kind of served a few different roles. So I was happy with it in the deck as a one of.
and so this goes back to making them have it, right? Because if your opponent has a Ravenous Trap in their hand, um, or you've got Inquisitions and you've
Mm-hmm.
got Cabal Therapies, so Cabal Therapies help if your opponent is planning on countering the Dread Return.
Mm-hmm.
You can clear the way with a Cabal Therapy, which is nice, or really 2 Cabal Therapies. Um, but if your opponent plays a Tormod's Crypt on turn 1, you just lose game 1, right?
Not necessarily. So you can always respond to the with Memory's Journey and put Labman and Pentad Prism on top of your deck. So
Ah.
you can cast the Pentad Prism for blue, and Labman just it is a way to win. Or you can try to do um, the similar thing of just try to put 3 cards on the board and or in your deck and try to beat down. But yeah, Tormod's Crypt, Graveyard Hate in general is very good against this deck, and that's why I played 4 of the natural states in the side, just as
Yeah.
catch all, destroy anything because like you can't play Leyline in the Void in this format really. So I wasn't worried about that, but to catch all any kind of interaction other than Ravenous Trap, which that's what all the duresses and inquisitions and such are for.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, look, if you're going off on turn 2 or turn 3, your opponent's seen 10 cards. I personally, I don't think I'm like mulling to a Tormod's Crypt. Maybe you should. I don't know. Maybe that's the way to do it. But sometimes you're really just checking their deck construction, right?
Yeah, and one of the reasons why I brought this deck is that I felt like there wasn't a lot of graveyard decks at the time, so people were trying to skimp on graveyard uh, hate in their sideboard. So I was like, okay, I'll come and use the graveyard to win the game. And
Yeah.
if you only have 2 Tormod's Crypts, good luck getting those in your top, 9, 10.
Yeah. I mean, that's just how metagames work, right? It's the same as Dredge and Modern. Uh, Graveyard Hate goes up, Dredge goes down, and then as Dredge goes down, Graveyard Hate also goes down, and then Dredge goes up. That's just metagames, right?
For sure.
And one of the things I'm going to do when I find some time, I'm going to go through all the 31 decks that were submitted for the Winnebago yesterday, and I'm going to go through and I'm going to pull all the sideboard cards and categorize them. Artifact hate, graveyard hate, combo hate, etc. And then I'm going to compare that to the decks that were brought, you know, and see what the hate, how the hate lines up to the field, and see if they're, correctly aligned.
See if people, had a pulse on the had a finger on the pulse of the metagame. I
Yeah,
like
and I'm
that
really
idea.
curious because like there was one affinity player, there were a couple Asmo food players, so it's like, do you need energy fluxes right now? I don't know.
For sure.
Um,
Yeah, it's very interesting watching how metagames develop.
yeah, and I will say I don't think I told you this yet. So we did the online spell table tournament the other week, and so Dave won playing Red Black Luris, and for his prize, I told him I'd buy him a deck, and this is what he chose. He said it looked really fun, and I said, "Okay, here you go, man."
I feel like this is very strong. It is a check of the format saying, "Oh, do you have graveyard hate? If not, and even if you do, I may still be able to weasel out from just one script."
Yeah,
I'm really happy with this deck. Of course, um, there's some refinements to be done and changes based on the metagame, but I'm overall very happy with this list.
yeah, agreed. Stepping over, we've got two more, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you've got to get out of here pretty soon, so I won't take up too much more of your time.
Sure.
We've got Hypergenesis as well, right?
Yes, so this is what I played for week 7. Another really unfair card, Hypergenesis. Um, and basically, I was just trying to power out as soon as possible and break parity with the normal Ashen Rider, Bogarden, Hellkite, and then also 4 Warstorm Surges. So um, this deck can actually kill as soon as turn 1 with the perfect with 6 cards, I think. As long as you have 2 of the Spirit Guides, which I think are maybe the best combo enabler in the format.
Having access to
And
8 guides for under $5 is crazy.
it is truly crazy how much they've gone down, especially with the Elvish Spirit Guide. So, basically, just wanted to cascade into a Hypergenesis and put a whole lot of power into play between Warstorm Surge and Frenzied Saddle Brute. Have lots of ways to reach your opponent, and then I'm also playing 4 Magister Sphinx, so
So
that
funny.
I really don't need a whole lot of damage to kill. And the mana base is honestly more functional than I was expecting it to be.
Oh,
Uh,
this looks fine, yeah. You have basically 12 5-color lands, sort of.
yeah, so I'm because I'm also splashing black for 2 of the demonic dreads, which definitely are the worst of the 3 mana cascade spells that I'm playing. But because violent outbursts are so pricey, I had to
Yep.
settle for 2 of those. But overall, whenever you're casting a cascade spell, you're, if not winning that turn, then setting up for the win the next turn and removing anything your opponent plays. So
Question on
I think this
Demonic Dread,
is
really quick.
one of the
Uh,
better decks that I played in the 8 weeks. And in the sideboard, I didn't do a whole lot of thinking. I was just like, I'll have stuff for graveyard. I'll have stuff for black based interaction. I'll have stuff for blue based interaction, and then I'll have stuff for aggro.
yeah.
And that's basically my thinking behind the sideboard.
I mean, that makes sense too, especially because you're constrained by the cascade restriction. You have to keep everything above 2 CMC. Makes sense to me. On the Demonic Dreads, you can't actually put that on the stack without a creature in play, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So I'm reliant on an opponent for playing a creature in the first few turns.
And
Um,
that's very similar to Oath of Druids, actually. I know some
it
people
is.
play with Oath of Druids, and personally, I'm hesitant. I think it matters less with the Demonic Dreads, especially because I mean that's only 2 of your 8 Cascade spells. Not that big of a deal.
Yeah, and that was one of the big proponents of me trying to squeeze into a violent outburst in here because violent outbursts are so much better than demonic dread, um,
Yeah,
and yeah, just being able to. But I was fine playing two of them because I felt like I needed at least 8 cascades, and um, there was enough creatures running around in this format that whenever I cast it, I win the game. So
Yeah.
I was fine with playing two.
So my kind of last question about this is, what's the worst hypergenesis you're willing to resolve, right? Because hypergenesis is going to let you dump your hand, and it's going to let the opponent dump their hand.
Hmm.
It's kind of like flipping your cards on the table at the end of poker, right?
Yeah.
And
Uh,
obviously, there are some combinations that just kill your opponent. If you have Magister Sphinx, Frenzied Saddle Brute, Magister Sphinx, that kills, or Magister Sphinx, Double Bogard and Hellkite, Warstorm Surge, two Hellkites, etc. But I guess my question is, are you willing to put in like a Magister Sphinx and an Ashen Rider, set their health to 10, blow up their scariest permanent, and then have a 1 turn clock? Is that fine? Like, is that a fine hypergenesis?
I did end up trying a couple hypergenesis like that. And honestly, yeah, if I'm putting two permanents into play, I think it's fine just because my permanents are much better, especially for the creatures. Warstorm Surge is basically there for the 1 turn kill, and
Yep.
also weirdly um, can break parity because the I don't have to target until the hypergenesis resolves. So basically turns everything that I play into another Bogard and Hellkite, except for I can't divvy up the damage. So yeah, I think just one or two is decent in this deck, and like if I have to against something like uh, uh, a rack deck or an aggro deck, I'm pretty comfortable doing that for one or two. But yeah, I definitely did get punished for doing that at one point where I went off against an unknown opponent, and I put them to 5 with 2/5/5 flyers in play, and they put in Jeskai Ascendancy and then went off on their turn with Jeskai Ascendancy and killed me with that. So
Oh, that's good magic.
it's not always the right decision, but it was still a nice story
Yeah, it's all context dependent, right?
for sure.
Yeah, I mean this deck is sweet, very scary. Do you think
Agreed.
that this is here to stay?
I think Hypergenesis is one of the better decks that I played. I think it's really hard to interact with. Basically, just black and blue removal again, um, and it just goes over the top of a lot of other decks. So I think this is definitely a player in the metagame.
I'm inclined to agree, especially because this doesn't go through the graveyard.
Hmm.
I love not going through the graveyard. You just invalidate an entire class of hate piece against you, and that's good.
There's really not a lot of catch-all hate pieces for this deck. You
It's
can't really play.
Void Mirror, right?
Um,
That's it.
yeah, Void Mirror is the only catch-all that I can think of, and that catches a lot of the Cascade decks, just like the Glimpse of Tomorrow
Yep.
combo that I think won week 8.
Yeah, I don't even know how good Void Mirror is. Well, I guess I don't know how common Glimpse of Tomorrow is. I'm not. It's not
Hmm.
clear to me how good Rhinos actually is. Um, and then I'm not sure Void Mirror is good enough for like High Tide. I think you're better off with
Hmm.
Damping Sphere. So I think it is really hard to target this deck with hate.
Agreed.
So yeah, I would definitely be interested to see more of this.
Hmm.
And then I'm excited to see this Shaman's list because I haven't actually looked at this yet. And I know there's some crazy stories. So tell me what we got going on here.
So basically, the idea behind playing shamans is playing Rage Forger, which if you've never heard of this card, and who would, it's an uncommon from Lorwyn.
Oh yeah.
It's really good. It's a really good lord. It basically bumps your shamans by 2, and one of them is unblockable because of its second ability. So it's basically a Thales Lieutenant that is also a Hell Rider. Is that what that card is called?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. That's a good way of putting it.
so it is really good Shaman Lord, and so that's basically what the deck is leaning on as far as its power. The other main piece of power is I get to play 4 Harmonic Prodigies, which with most or all of my shamans doubles triggers everything. Almost all my shamans have a triggered ability. So yeah, this just turns Burning Tree Emissary into a ritual and Elvish Visionary into divination. So just doing some pretty unfair things with both of those cards. Also, weirdly, there's some strange shamans that I've found that to put in this list. So Ignoble Hierarch is a very good card if you have played Modern, and I get to play a playset here, just coming in under about $8. And then the backside of Kumano faces Kakazan, which is a really good aggro card if you can play it on turn one,
It's a good
is
card.
also weirdly a shaman, so it gets pumped by Rage Forger. Um, the other weird thing in this deck construction is I'm playing 4 unclaimed territories and just 2 black pain lands and land of war wastes.
Yep.
In the main deck, I'm playing 2 Judith, the Scourge Diva, as 2 more lords that are similar to Rage Forger, and then I also have some spice in the sideboard with Plague Crafter, which are also shamans that I can cast off my black sources.
That's wild. Yeah, this deck is
So
crazy. I
yeah,
love seeing Shaman of the Great Hunt as well. I don't know if I've ever seen that card registered, and it's so cool.
and it is quite good in this deck specifically, since the first paragraph there is a triggered ability, and with Harmonic Prodigy, you can put a lot of power onto your shamans in a hurry, and also it's just a 4 mana 4/2 haste. So sometimes
Yeah.
you on turn 3 or turn 4 with the Hierarch, you can just catch them unaware of how much extra burst damage you can do.
Yeah, wow, this list is nasty. It looks like it, kind of like we talked about, it asks the question very, very hard.
Mhm.
It seems like it's got a quick time to kill, but I feel like there's decent amounts of reach. With Shaman of the Great Hunt, you've got some amount of card advantage with the Harmonic Prodigy, Elvish Visionary thing,
Mhm.
but you have explosiveness and Ignoble Hierarch and Burning Tree.
So yeah, it is really good at,
Yeah,
at putting bodies on the table with Burning Tree and a Goblin and Archomancer as well to really be able to power out your hand. It's got, yeah, like you said, reach, and it does a lot of things well, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to do it. Yeah, it's a good decent aggro deck with a tribe that there's not a lot of people that think about, just because um, the popular ones are a little bit more expensive, card wise or dollars wise,
yeah,
whereas Rage Forger is a quarter for a piece.
I love that. Anything you would change going forward? Like if you were to play this deck again, or if someone was thinking about picking up this list for themselves?
I didn't. I don't think I have anything off the top of my head that I'd changed. I just played this not even a week ago, so
Yeah,
I feel like this is a pretty good indication where I thought the format was going. That I'm basically only playing these 4 drops as burst damage and ways to really pump up the board. Um, yeah, I'm pretty happy with this deck, at least with budget, uh, as far as budget constraints.
makes sense. And I think you had a pretty crazy turn with a sideboard Plague Crafter, right? I
That's
think I
correct.
heard about
So
that.
yeah, my last round with this, I was playing against Troll Worship, which relies upon worship to reduce all incoming damage to 0 as long as you have a creature and 1 life. Um, and the main way that I had to get around that was playing Rex Sage, but I didn't have a Rex Sage when the worship came down. And then the next turn, he Gideon interventioned to um, invalidate my Rex Sages. So I was like, well, the only out that I can think of is if I just have more Plague Crafter triggers than he has creatures, and then I kill him that way. Um, so yeah, I use Shaman of the Great Hunt's activated ability to draw my deck basically, and put 4 Harmonic Prodigies into play, and then 2 of the Plague Crafters to make them sack 10 creatures, and then kill them with the rest of my creatures. So I was playing to my 1 out, and it ended up paying off.
That's actually absurd. I've
It was
never
it
heard
was
of a
really
troll
good.
worship lock being broken like that.
it was a really good experience and really good story to tell.
That's cool. I love. First off, I love that prison decks exist in this format.
I agree.
It makes you really think about your deck construction.
Hmm.
But I also love when prison decks have chinks in their armor and there's ways to beat the lock. You know?
I agree. Yeah, I am happy that there are prison decks in this format because that's a kind of a staple of Legacy and Vintage.
Yep.
That's an archetype that sees a lot of play. So I'm happy that that can translate well to this budget format for sure.
Yeah. So, all right. After the 8 weeks, you've been pretty embroiled in this format. What do you think going forward? Do you think this format's here to stay? Does it have staying power, or is this format a flash in the pan?
Um, it's not a flash in the pan for me at the very least, and that's what I'll start off with is I like that I can brew lots of different things. I have probably I don't know 10 or 15 deck ideas that are sitting on my Moxfield account just
Oh yeah.
like, oh, this is a cool interaction. Oh, well, maybe I'll try this. Oh, I don't think anybody's tried this before. Or, oh, somebody's tried this, but not in really the way I liked. So there's a lot of room for um, brewing and a lot of room for like playing. I won't say pet cards, but good pet cards, we'll call them.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm very happy with where this format's gone, and I think that you know as long as people like playing the format, that it'll be here to stay, and I think people will like the brewing aspect of it for sure.
yeah. It's I've been very pleasantly surprised by how it's managed to not be dominated by a single deck or a single archetype. It feels like it's still wide open, and I think we've been putting it through its paces for a couple months now, really.
Yeah, yeah, it's been good to see what people think about this format and what people want to play, and kind of how it's evolved over the course of this league, at least in the Northern Kentucky area for sure.
Yeah. Got any final parting thoughts before we sign out? Anything you want to shout out? Anything you're working on, or any thoughts you want to share before we go?
Not a lot. I just want to say thank you for putting this content out there and interviewing the people who have a good idea of how this format is evolving, and just helping being a good advocate for this format. And I think all good budding formats need a really strong advocate, and I think you play that job really well. So thank you for having me on, and thank you for all you do for this format.
I really appreciate that. Yeah, I just kind of like you said, I think it's a beautiful format, and I think we're in a really weird time for 60 card 1v1 Magic,
Hmm.
because it's not really the default way to play anymore. A commander is becoming the way to
Agreed.
play, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just different. And we're in a time where modern and legacy are so expensive and so volatile with Ragavans and pitch elementals being printed, and this feels like a really nice safety valve. And I personally like a lot of novelty. I have a hard time choosing a deck and sticking to it for 3 years, like modern might ask. And this format scratches that itch, while also not being a huge financial investment. I feel like it just serves a role. So I think it's just good to get the word out, try to kind of legitimize it. And one thing I was talking to Austin about, he's the one who played Obosh and took down the tournament.
Hmm.
He was saying he really appreciated that there's all the deck information out there, so he knew what to brew against. Because for someone who's getting into the format, I want to make sure they have the information to know what people are playing. Because how are you supposed to plan to beat people if you don't know what people are playing?
Agreed. Yeah,
Um,
and that's part of the struggle with sideboarding in this format is you really have to be like, well, I don't, some of the stuff I know what there are or what like archetypes there are, but some of it is like sometimes you just play against something like Dredge and you're like, oh, I haven't seen anybody even brew Dredge. I didn't know this was a thing,
yeah.
and kind of lose to that. So yeah, I think having like at least a rough metagame or deck, good deck archive is important for helping onboard new players for sure.
Yeah, agreed. Well, with that, I think I'll let you go about the rest of your Sunday, all right?
All right, thanks so much.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for hopping on.